Don't be scared. This is the podcast that always leaves the light on. This is Monster Under the Bed, the podcast that takes some of the fears and myths in our society and busts them wide open. My name is Dunkler.
Well, I guess before when I was younger, I liked to sleep in the light. But now, because my sister likes to sleep in the dark, I got used to it. I might have been a little scared of the dark.
Okay. Why do you think darkness is scary?
Well, maybe because I can't see anything.
Okay.
It's all like black.
So what do you want to see?
Sometimes I like when I see my sister in her bed.
That was my daughter, Liv, who is 7. And until fairly recently, when she was younger, we kept the light on in the corridor when she went to bed. Or she had a unicorn-shaped nightlight just right next to her. Now, she's pretty cute, so we went along with that. But I have a confession to make. Sometimes when my family is away, or I'm on a business trip somewhere by myself, I also leave a small light on at night in the bathroom or maybe in the hallway. And I'm 38 years old. Not so cute anymore, no? Leaving a light on uses electricity, and it wears out the light bulb too. So I started wondering, what is the environmental cost of these monsters under the bed that I'm worried about? Was I causing greenhouse gas emissions because I was a little bit afraid of the dark? And I realized that the monsters under the bed are just one of many myths that keep us from doing the rational thing. So here I am. I decided to do a podcast about these myths. My name is Alar Tankler, and I work at the European Investment Bank, the EU Bank. We have all kinds of experts here who can help me explore different fears and beliefs that people have, which are costing us as a society. So in each episode of this podcast, we'll fight one imaginary monster under the bed and hopefully win the battle for a more rational way of doing things. So that you don't miss an episode, subscribe to A Monster Under the Bed on iTunes, Acast, Stitcher, Player FM, or wherever you get your podcast from. And also, let me know if you can think of a monster we should expose on future episodes. Get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Allartankler, ALLARTANKLER, or you can just tag at EIB. We'll start off by going back to the actual monsters under the bed, if there is such a thing. I wanted to know how much greenhouse gas are the monsters under the bed, or at least our fear of them, generating. But first, why do we fear the monsters under the bed in the first place? I decided to ask an expert. It was pretty difficult to arrange for a sit-down talk with her because she is 11 and she's also my daughter. Her name is Maya. I asked her why some people are scared of the dark.
Because they can't see anything, and their imagination, they think that, if I can't see anything, maybe there's something in the dark that I don't know of, and they don't want to be surprised when it's dark and you hear something, even like a little, if like somebody rolls over in their bed. They think, I can't see why that noise was made. I can only hear it, and I've got no idea what made that noise. And so, they start thinking that, oh no, there's a thief in the house.
So you're more worried about thieves than monsters.
My sister is worried about thieves and kidnappers and stuff like that. You can ask her.
Really? You're scared of thieves and kidnappers?
Yeah.
Not monsters?
No, because I know monsters are not real.
Okay. But thieves and kidnappers are real?
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes them scarier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud to reiterate that I am the father of such rational-sounding children. And you can't argue with the data provided by these kids. They either were or had been afraid of the dark when trying to go to sleep. and they preferred to sleep with some light on. Now, before I went to find out how much the planet is being warmed because of these supposed monsters and kidnappers, I wanted to understand what was behind this fear that some people had. I called up a psychologist who has had a lot of experience counseling kids. She also happens to be my mother. Her name is Dunkler, and she's based in Estonia. And for starters, I asked if I had been afraid of the dark as a kid.
I cannot recall that you were afraid, but I also cannot recall that you were alone in darkness. I think this is connected with being alone in darkness.
So I was most of the time sharing the bedroom with someone, either with you or with one of my siblings.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so maybe the reason why I don't feel comfortable in the dark by myself now as a grown-up is because I never had to adjust to being alone in the dark as a child. But I also wanted to know what psychology tells us about why people are afraid of the dark at all.
I believe one of the main reasons is that in a darkness you don't control your environment. You don't know what's happening around you. You don't see anything. And as we, normal people who have a good eyesight, we take so many stimuli through our visual experiences. When we are put in the darkness, we don't have these stimuli and we don't know what's happening around us. But then we have to make a difference between fear and phobia. And phobia means that this fear is very strong and is already disturbing the person's normal life. And this may have several different reasons. There can be some experiences from the childhood when a child has been left in the darkness as a punishment. Okay. And remembering this experience, there can also be something that happened in a darkness that was not pleasant and that created a great fear, and then the person can remember it the whole life. But there can also be some stories that have been told.
I don't know that the European Investment Bank has any specialists who could authoritatively tell me that there are no monsters under the bed and that there's nothing to be afraid of in the dark. But I do know that there are some people working here who should be able to tell me how much this fear of the dark is costing the environment. It is raining and they do work in another building, but I guess I better pay them a visit. So I'm now going to meet Wouter Maynardsma, who's a climate change specialist in our Safeguards and Quality Management Department at the European Investment Bank. And what he does is he measures the climate impacts of all of the projects that the bank does. So I'm hoping that he knows also how to measure the climate impact of monsters under the bed. We'll see. So, Wouter, do you have kids?
I don't.
Do you live by yourself or you live with a partner?
Yeah, I live with my wife.
Okay. And so I assume if you don't have kids, you don't have the need to leave the light on at night because you're afraid of the dark or anything.
Yeah, we generally don't leave the light on, that's true.
Well, I got to tell you, I leave the light on sometimes when I'm by myself, and I leave the light on for my daughter who's 7 years old, and she sometimes has difficulty falling asleep without the light on. So we've been wondering what's the climate impact of those lights that are being left on. So how would we go about measuring that impact?
So it's a set of calculations that we would make. We would, for example, first look at a single household. We would think about the number of lights you would leave on. Let's say you only leave the light on in the bedroom, then we were talking about one light. You would think about how long you leave the light on. That depends on how long you sleep I guess, let's say 8 hours a night typically. We would look at the electricity consumption of your light bulb, so the amount of watts that your light bulb consumes. And we would then multiply this by the time that the light is on. We would multiply this again by the amount of nights in a year, if you would like to know the answer per year. And then we would look at the number of households, so the number of people that leave their light on in the night. We would multiply that with the electricity consumption of the light bulb per night, and then we have the total electricity consumption of leaving the light on for a certain amount of people.
Do you think we could do kind of a back of the envelope calculation? I looked up, there are in the EU, there's 220 million households, 65 million households with at least one child. So I would say, let's say roughly half of those households have a child of less than 9 years old. That's a pretty rough estimate, but let's go with that. In addition, there's 70 million single-person households, and a lot of these are maybe elderly people. But let's say a proportion of those as well leave a light on. So I would say 15 million households in the EU. Let's say they leave one light on for, let's say they do it for not every night. Let's say that they do it for 200 nights. So that's 50 million. Times 200 nights per year. That's already what? That's
200 nights a year?
Let's say that.
Okay. Well, we're talking really big numbers here, Alain. So we have 50 million households. We have 8 hours. And we have 200 nights. And then the calculation doesn't work because I shouldn't have put hours here. And then we are talking about 80 billion hours.
80 billion hours. Okay.
80 billion hours. While we were speaking, I Googled the average energy consumption of a light bulb. I found a random figure of 15 watts. And now we can multiply these hours by these watts. And then we have so-called watt hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can divide this amount by 1,000 to arrive at kilowatt hours.
Mm-hmm.
And if we now have a typical emission factor,
Okay.
which are the emissions per kilowatt hour to produce the electricity, for example, from burning coal or burning natural gas, but it could also be from using solar or wind energy. It varies in the EU. In France, it's much lower because there's more nuclear. In Germany, it could be higher because there's more coal. But let's assume 500 grams per kilowatt hour. And then I'm talking about grams of CO2 equivalent. Then we get a tremendous amount of grams, namely 600 billion grams. Now, nobody can work with that many grams, so I suggest we convert it to tons.
Okay.
At the EIB, we report our carbon footprint in kilotons, but for now we can work with tons, and then we need to divide these grams by 1,000 to arrive at kilograms, so roughly the size of a liter of water, and another 1,000 to arrive at tons. So then we are talking 600,000 tons of CO2.
Wow, that sounds like a lot.
Yeah, it's roughly it represents roughly the emissions of 100,000 households in the EU.
Wow, in a year.
In a year.
Wow. So from that, it sounds like leaving a light on just because people are afraid of monsters under the bed has a pretty big impact on the environment. But how does that, like, if you look at it in comparison with some of the other things that have an impact on the environment, some of the other things that we do in our homes, how does that stack up? Is that a big impact, or is that relatively minor compared to everything else that we do?
If you would do a similar thing and you would take, for example, the energy consumption of the heating in your house, or you would think about the car that you drive, or you would think about the food that you consume, then this light is peanuts. If you're looking at a household, then by far the largest impact is flying. If you fly somewhere, if you regularly fly, if you go on holiday, if you go on business trips, that is by far the largest part of your impact.
But here at the European Investment Bank, we don't look at it from a household point of view. We look at economy as a whole, and we look at different sectors in the economy. How do we calculate the greenhouse gases from different economic activities? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I can give you an example. So here at the European Investment Bank, we invest in a lot of different types of projects, right? We finance, it ranges from education to healthcare to energy to transport and to industry.
And just to be very clear about this, everything has a climate impact, right? It's not just the energy production that has a climate impact. It's not just burning coal that has an energy impact. Building a school also has an energy impact, right?
That's correct. Almost all activities that we in society that we have, they consume energy. We need energy. We need materials for that. So that causes greenhouse gas emissions because we consume fuels. However, some sectors have a much higher climate impact than others. Industry, energy, and transport, and to a certain extent also agriculture, they have the largest climate impact. What we mostly do is we look at the resources and the energy consumed in these projects and the typical emissions per unit of resource. And by multiplying these two aspects with one another, we calculate the carbon footprint of an investment. What we also do for many types of projects is we calculate the climate impact of a project, and we then we assign a cost to this impact. So we have a price per ton of carbon, an internal shadow carbon price, and by applying this price to the emissions, we put a price, we put a monetary value of this impact, and we make sure that this impact is included in the economic cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, so we try to make sure that the benefit that the project creates outweighs that cost to the environment, so to say.
Exactly. And maybe an interesting example would be a public transport. So the EIB finances a lot of public transport projects, and they bring many types of benefits. They connect different regions. They provide employment. They could lead to lower emissions of harmful substances. They could even improve safety. If you ride on a train or if you ride in a metro, you would have less traffic accidents. You have less congestion, for example. But another important impact, if you manage to get people from a car into a metro or into a train, then the energy consumption per passenger and also the emissions per passenger become much lower. So when we calculate the climate impact of such a project, we think it's important to report the absolute emissions, so the actual emissions of the project, but it's also interesting to indeed make this comparison to a plausible alternative situation. And for something like a metro, we would then do an analysis and we would determine if we had not built this metro, what would have been the likely modality, the transport modality that these people, that these passengers would have used to go to work, to go to school, or to go shopping. So we compare the emissions of the metro project with the emissions of the baseline, which would be driving, taking the bus, cycling, for example.
Okay, so apparently leaving the light on at night is peanuts compared to some of the other ways we impact the environment. Even if my assumptions about the prevalence of the fear were rather high. It was more than 500,000 tons of greenhouse gas just to keep these evil spirits at bay. I went back to Mary, the psychologist, also known as my mother, to see if there are ways to help people deal with their fear of darkness.
There are different kinds of treatments, but especially when we speak about children, one of the way of treating this strong fear can be just being together with the child in darkness, not leaving the child alone, not saying there is nothing in the darkness, but just being in this darkness together with the child, maybe holding even hand or touching, so that the child knows that there is someone also with them, and creating these kind of safe experiences of being in the darkness.
This was encouraging. Maybe we can all hold hands in the darkness and reduce our CO2 emissions. But she also told me something really alarming. She thinks people are actually becoming more and more afraid of the dark.
But then I believe that one of the reasons why more and more people are afraid of darkness is also that we are so urbanized. We live in so much light, so we actually don't experience the total darkness very often. When we walk around in a city, even if it's the evening, all the street lights are there, and we don't experience actual darkness. And when we happen to be in the actual total darkness, then it's so much more frightening because it's so unusual.
I also went back to the two experts you heard in the beginning of the show for some advice. I asked them how to deal with the fear of the dark.
I know.
What?
So if for example, your parents put on a kind of music, so you know they're always there.
So you can hear your parents.
Yeah.
If you can hear your parents, then that makes it better.
Yeah.
I like knowing that my parents are there, and then I can tell myself, this is not real, my parents are there. If it were, then they're going to do something about it.
What's not real?
Like maybe something I hear, I think monster or thief or something like that.
Okay. And then if you hear your parents, then you know that it's not there because
It's my imagination.
Otherwise they would do something.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's another tip.
I think it's especially scary when you've just, I don't know, watched a movie with some kind of villain or read a book that's somewhat scary. And then it's hard to go to sleep because your head keeps, you're thinking about the book or the movie. And you're thinking about the bad things that happen at the movie, and you're scared that it might happen right now.
So what do you do?
I think I just picture one of my dreams or things that I want to do someday. If I want to read a scary book before bedtime, I read the scary book and then I read one of Liv's Fairy Princess books, and it helps me go to sleep, really.
So apparently a common cure is what the specialists call exposure therapy. And this means exposing the patient to non-threatening doses of darkness. So I'll be doing a little exposure therapy on myself now. So I've turned off all the lights here in the studio, and I have to say it does already feel a little different. I don't know if you can also tell by my voice. Anyway, I need to get out of here quick. No, I can do this. But the team here at Monster Under the Bed will be tackling other myths and fears in the next episodes of the show. We will look at what drives us to make even more consequential and economically questionable choices than leaving a light on. Oh, this is creepy. So tune in again next week for another episode, and in the meantime, subscribe to the podcast and get in touch with me on Twitter to tell me how you've gotten rid of your fear of the dark. I'm at Dunkler. Bye now.